Well, here we are talking about trauma and just going with the flow. I think if anyone's listening, this is Skylar. I'm Jared. We're brothers. And we both love talking about healing from trauma. I think in the last chapter of the book, he mentions trauma being one of the four kind of gateways to enlightenment. Maybe that's why we're drawn to it. Maybe there are other reasons. Um,
Probably our own trauma.
yeah, definitely. And it's funny how we've both been on a journey to heal our own trauma in our own ways. And here we are reconnecting over a book about healing trauma.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and have this topic be the center for both of us.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what impacted you most about Peter Levine's book, and how does that tie into your? Well, we can just start with that and tie it in later.
Yeah, we can ping pong and love to hear your answer as well.
Yeah.
The story at the beginning of the book where it almost seemed too good to be true, and he said it was too good to be true, that it was an exception, but where this woman named Nancy was terrified in her body, and he said, "Run, Nancy," and she was able to run, kind of in a visualization state. She was getting in touch with this trauma that sort of paralyzed her, and then she was able to complete the cycle, run and kind of get that energy out of that was frozen in her body out. And so the ideas of it being biological in the body, I and that you're not broken, that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just like a little um, thing in the body that can be removed, that can be released or enlightened, I guess, in some ways. So I think that's in a nutshell. But man, I love him for so many reasons too. The way his stories, his exercises, the way he talks. Like, what about you?
Um, yeah, that's really stimulating. Like the whole book for me. Uh, I really appreciated the way he was able to map and explain biologically the different response cycles that the different parts of our nervous system can go through, and how they can get stuck by our current social structure in the world, like our society and stuff, and like by being humans with this more complex way to shut down our own systems. But the examples of like the orienting response, where you look around and you have to, if you don't get to complete that, then I was watching, they're like someone develops a twitch, and and when it's brought back into the context of them having been cut off consciously, like from a car accident, in the stories that he tells, like they weren't able to turn and look at the threat that they perceived, and then a month later they develop a twitch, and it's like really simple actually to if they're resourced enough to go into that memory and bit by bit finish the process of looking around and imagining the threat and like reimagining avoiding it, and then like that triggers the release, is just so stunning. um that it that is doable, like that there's hope.
Yeah, and I liked how you literally looked to the
Hmm.
left. It's very embodied. We can talk about it all we want, but getting in touch with that part of us, I guess, and completing the cycle. We've both mentioned this a couple times. Um, what do you mean by that? I guess maybe, and do you have an example in your own life?
Yeah. Good question. So he talks about the fight or flight response, and there's a cycle of activation and release when the threat is passed, and that the common trauma uh, that we're used to is actually from a immobility response. That's like the more common thing that people come with is an immobility response, which is like fight, flight happening simultaneously, and you get stuck in this like tense state of immobilized fear, and then it never discharges. So, um, in my own life, I'm working with this currently. Um, I have just discovered a relationship with a chronic back pain from a wrestling injury, and in a session with a friend, I was like in imaginative experiencing of that moment, and I got slammed by someone in a drill, and it was like way too aggressive, and he was bigger, and like we were just doing double leg takedown, like but and my breath, I like had this breathing response of like rapid breath for like 30 minutes. But I went out, I was all alone. I went out in the locker room, and then I came back in and kept wrestling. And it's like my body needed to run, or it needed to like, I'm not sure. So I'm in this right now, and I'm wondering
Hmm.
how to imaginatively, like, so the person I was working with wasn't familiar with this stuff. We were practicing Hakomi IFS, and it was like, and then I read this and I'm like, oh, that's what we needed right then. Like I accessed the traumatic moment,
Mhm.
and it needed to go into completing the cycle. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Um, and yeah, well, yeah, completing the cycle,
I
that
did.
energy in your body was there. That the fear of being crushed and killed. I mean, on an animal level,
Right.
your body was like, this guy's gonna freaking smother me.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that short breathing, I feel that. Yeah, and because you weren't maybe resourced enough, we'll say in that moment, you were all alone.
Yeah.
I think as kids, even a loud yell, stop, or it doesn't have to be this horrible thing. Trauma can be horrible, can be just horrible. But the more mundane things, the
Mhm.
accidents of life, the going outside in the hallway after wrestling, and that energy being in that energy there.
So I'm having a little insight into what might have completed the response,
Hmm.
because he talks about the humans have the social engagement system where our first line of defense of regulating our nervous system is to look to others and get support from others. So if you're in a herd or you're in like a scary situation and a loud noise and you look and everyone else is like, oh, it's no big deal, you immediately calm down. If everyone else is running, you don't even have to know what it is, you start running. Um, and yeah, I didn't have the resources in myself. I like had a shame block to be weak, and it didn't let me uh, allow
Ask for
myself to
help, or
discharge, ask for help, like cry. I didn't cry. It was like, um,
yeah,
so that's like my easiest touch into what he's talking about.
yeah. And I think when we as babies, there's those studies where the back in the 60s when they just did all sorts of crazy stuff. They just did really crazy studies that were unethical, but we learned a lot. And when mothers, they still when mothers don't look at their kid even for a little bit, the babies start crying. They don't like that. It's very painful for them if they're being ignored. Um, yeah, we look to other people for help, and I think if anyone listening could just imagine, as a kid, if you were feeling lonely, alone, kids. I remember the dentist. It would go so slow. An hour would feel like so long, and it'd be so boring. And if you're left alone for just a few hours, oh, I'm not saying that's traumatic, but you can just imagine little things like that where the kid is in pain and they're looking around and they're all alone and they're starting to get tense in their body, right? Because that's what the immobilization response is. They're afraid something dangerous is going to happen. They're getting ready to run, but then they can't. Um, Maybe the kid isn't out of the crib yet, or in the case of an adult, maybe the adult does something that's just rude. You get so furious, it's unfair. You're resentful. But I mean, you're a kid. You're 3 feet tall, 4 feet, 5 feet. You're young. You can't. It's terrifying to speak up to an adult. So you're caught between wanting to express that anger, um, but we're just trapped. And then we learn that growing up. I know for me, oh, I'm not sure what comes up for me right now.
Well, what comes up with you and working with people, and like how to, I
Yeah,
we
I
could go
think for
further into
me,
the book or bridge into IFS.
yeah, I think the book also mentions this other form of trauma, which is what
Hmm.
I experience most: the dissociation, blankness, frozen, the void. Um, because like a lot of people, I think we had good parents for the most part. I think the major form of trauma was some sort of neglect, some sort of
Emotional neglect.
yeah,
Yeah.
emotional neglect, something like this. Physical needs were taken care of, but emotional just not really. If you're colorblind, you just miss it, right? You just miss a certain frequency, and so I think for me, this is another. Um, I'm not sure of the wording of this. I wonder what he would say. So the traumatic thing was not being seen, or sort of you, a baby will sort of just space out if they're not being attended to. Um,
Hmm.
so then the dissociation. So if they look at, like for me, I'll look inside, and oftentimes it's just a void. It's just a blank spot. And I really liked in the book, I think this is one of the later chapters, but talking about how that's a death. I was wondering how to complete that cycle,
And
you know because
what
if
was it?
you're because if you're it
Hmm.
was a death, so the cycle is rebirth. Like if you
Ah.
were physically abused and you need to shield yourself or to run away or to fight
Hmm.
back, or you can sort of reimagine. If you're in contact with that energetic state and you're embodying the trauma, it's there, you can sort of reenact a different outcome. I remember in the book the
Hmm.
story of the wolves, and he finally ran away from the wolves and
Right.
yelled at them, and so we got that aggressive energy out as well as the fear. But dissociation for me is different, because the completion of that in the book is rebirth, seeing it as a death, but seeing it as this blankness. um, because that's what happens when you die, right? It's blank, pretty probably, you know it's blank. And um, when babies aren't seen, when they aren't attuned, it's blank, you know something like this. And so
Hmm.
anyways, for me, um, this confusion that comes up as well. So I think when I look inward, it's finding this blankness and seeing it as like a normal response. Like, hey, this is blank.
Hmm.
Let me stay with this. What's this void like? And
Yeah.
And if you stay with it, then you just stay there. There's a feeling of being blank, and there's some confusion, and you just stay there and feel that. And at some point there is sort of like a rebirth. There's a reconnection. There's a, oh, that's my body. um, I can feel my body and it feels safe. And I think that in a way is the completion of that cycle. I feel like we should talk more about the completion of the cycle. That seems to be so important to
Hmm.
this understanding. I know we've kind of talked about the stimulus and these different responses. I don't know. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, you're reminding me of the exercise where you like slap your arms or you shower head, but you like slap your body and you say like these are my hands, and you just wake up the sensory field. So like all of these cycle completions revolve around going to the felt sense. So that's like a key,
Yeah.
right? Like there's blankness and there's still body sensation. There's still connection. Like even if the thread is small and the emotions aren't there, there's like still the body, and like awakening the felt sense is the key in all the different kinds of trauma to finish the cycle, to like tune into the energy and then reimagine and like process the energy.
Yeah, the felt sense.
Yeah.
That's like the key to
Yeah.
the body.
Right.
Yeah.
So that part alone seems like invaluable, that
Yeah.
there's like a one part of it is resourcing, kind of where you're building your capacity to tolerate body sensations that you might that
Mhm.
are uncomfortable,
Mm.
and just your capacity to focus on body sensations and to feel the nuance. It's like it's a new, we don't spend a lot of time feeling our bodies, and so it's kind of a dull sense, and you develop it, you practice, and you get more sensitive. um Yeah. So that feels like that's the introduction to working with trauma. You
Yeah.
can't complete the cycle before feeling your body.
Yeah. And for the reader who's, hey, reader, I know you've heard of Headspace, Calm, or listener, rather, YouTube viewer. I know you've tried meditation before. I know you probably like meditation. I know you probably feel frustrated by meditation, mindfulness, etc. I think this is the starting point. This is what Skylar's talking about. That this is sort of before you get to trauma, mindfulness, this ability to be aware of the sensation, the five senses, uh, without judgment, being able to scan your body, to feel the body, to kind of stay there a little bit, bring your attention back to the present, maybe take a deep breath and soothe and name your emotions. Like that's all, that is the gateway to trauma. But I know basically a lot of readers um, maybe think that's, they might feel frustrated or if you don't heal trauma, mindfulness is going to feel inadequate. They might feel like, okay, that kind of works, but it didn't really get to the bottom of my issues. And if you feel that way about mindfulness, I just wanted to say that yeah, that's probably true. um, that you're at the gateway of trauma. You've got these skills to start going inwards, but I think that's where IFS comes in. and
Hmm.
and um, and maybe, yeah, how do you, maybe we should, I think this is a, yeah,
Yeah.
IFS. How do you want
I mean,
to
having someone in the role of observing you to help, like the therapist or the IFS practitioner, the Hakomi practitioner, it's like they're tracking in addition to you, so that you don't we have all these unconscious defense mechanisms to swerve and dodge the sensation, the thought that is going to lead to the trauma memory, the trauma feeling. And that's really where like we need help. Like we're not individual creatures, you know um and I think some people can totally do this on their own, and it's not me. Like, yeah, it's just not. Like, I've tried. And I wanted to add this because I thought you'd appreciate it. I heard Peter Levine, say, like, most people who are drawn to meditation are um, not the people who will benefit from it, because they're already the people that are kind of leaning towards dissociative traumatic tendencies. And so they end up just sitting in hours of slightly dissociated states, which is like how me and you have both had intenser periods of time meditating, and it just having blocks. It gets us somewhere, and then it stopped yielding results. And now it's like
Yes.
this interpersonal, more imaginative, emotional exploration that's really like opening both of us up and healing, like integrating our parts. And this framework, I feel like the IFS framework is just so good for satisfying our minds, you know, to allow us to
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. It might be fun for the reader just to hear a little bit about our crazy adventures in meditation, but I love what you said. I mean, I know I've spoken about spiritual bypass before, and I do think my time at Tassajara was, uh, yeah, like probably a lot of it was dissociating. I mean, I did have my highs or my spiritual
Hmm.
like boom, like whoa. But yeah, I think for both of us, I think we got to a certain point and we're like, okay, this mindfulness stuff is good, but like, what's next? Or man, I'm still in pain and feeling all this shame. So like, how can I get rid of that?
Right. Right.
And you've done your journeys as well, doing
Hmm.
all sorts of different things, ayahuasca and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I like what you're saying about internal family systems. How yeah, mindfulness can be done individually, and maybe some people can heal trauma on their own, but most people having a guide who can sort of, and I've been seeing a therapist for 7 years too.
Right.
This stuff's tough on your own, but because we do have these unconscious habits of mind, or parts, we'll say parts,
Hmm.
protector parts. We have these protector parts. Maybe we can explain to the audience. Well, oh, I don't like to explain. Let's lead by example, right? But anyways,
Hmm.
we got parts that sort of block us from feeling the trauma. So maybe we can um, expand upon that idea, and I'd love to also um, at some point just he has these like 12 steps to
Yeah.
healing trauma. Maybe we could list them and just kind of, but we can
Yeah.
get that later. Want to hear what you think about IFS and protector parts and
Well, it
yeah.
seems like a good time to distinguish between developmental wounding, like lack of nourishment, but not at a traumatic level. That it's more like a long-term situational thing that isn't nourishing you as a kid, and that's developmental wounding. And that's where like IFS and like the cognitive parts and like speaking to the different parts of yourself is really helpful. And then there's like traumatic moments where it's locked in your biology and it really needs somatic experiencing to help complete the cycle. And either way, the IFS approach gets you to both, you know, and then it just it turns towards somatic uh, unfolding when needed. And then it works with developmental wounding. So the protector parts are learned strategies as children to adapt to our environment and to the things that weren't, maybe your parents didn't, um, weren't safe in certain ways when you expressed certain things. And so you learned, a part of you decided, okay, I need to protect by shutting down this other part of me that likes to say and be, do this thing that my parents don't like. Or school, you have to sit still and you have to focus and you have to get good grades. Okay, well, that means I have to shut down certain parts of me that would rather be outside and crazy and running around. And so protector parts polarize within us with these younger child parts, and they get kind of locked up. But it's not trauma per se in this way that we're talking about it with Peter Levine's work. Although maybe it
Yeah,
can be.
yeah.
Like too much.
Yes. No. I'll just, yeah. No, great. Let me digest it a little bit.
Cool.
Inner children, vulnerable, young. They're who we really are. They're who we are deep down. The innocent. Just we love them. They love us. They're vulnerable. And what I heard you say, there's these traumatic moments, whether it's capital trauma or little t trauma. And we all know how kids cry, right? Kids cry, and there's tremendous pain. And then, I guess, and the developmental strategies you're saying, and I agree, is there's the kid crying, essentially, and then how do they're in pain and they're not getting the soothing from the adult. The environment is noisy, whatever. It feels dangerous. They're not able to complete that crying, or they cry out for help. Um, and then so these developmental strategies, as I understand it, they sort of, the kid learns to manage the pain, to block out the pain. Classic response is the shock system. When the body goes into shock, if it stops feeling any pain. People in car accidents will be mangled, and or at least for they won't feel anything for a little bit. So that's the body's automatic response, shutting away the pain. And we do this, I think, for me, and I think a lot of people, but we learn to think. Thinking is one way to sort of
Totally.
get out of pain. And then thinking is a part, we would say, because that's the developmental strategy.
Right.
Yeah. And then what was the last part you said? You said, so in IFS model, so the thinking would be the protector, and then the pain would be the exile. I just wanted to remark that. Like, I liked how you said shut down, and the exile is kind of like the, to exile someone, you kick them out, you're not allowed. So I thought that was a good analogy there. Yeah.
Right. So in realms of time, maybe we should go into the 12 steps that Peter Levine lays out, and then integrate that and wrap up.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just read them, and then we can talk about them. Okay. So there's 12. I'm just going to go through them real quick. Does that sound right? Is that what we're doing? Or do we want to go through them each one by one and kind of talk about them one by one?
Maybe just read them, but give a pause, and we'll see if something comes up that feels really important.
Yeah, we can say a few words. Okay. So phase 1, safety and containment exercises. I think that's what you're talking about, mindfulness.
Yeah. Mindfulness and support. I know that it's the essence of both Hakomi and IFS therapy is to foster the feeling of safety within the client by actually making sure they feel safe. And this would be by making sure the protectors feel safe before trying to get rid of them.
Absolutely.
It's really to not try to get rid of them. It's to approach them with a desire to understand.
Yeah, and I think we'll keep on getting into that. I think the therapeutic alliance. Well, let's see. So phase 2, I like what you said. Yeah, phase 2, grounding and centering. Kind of similar. This is again kind of the mindful thing. You're feeling your body, an ability to kind of stay present, I would say.
Yeah, stay with present experience. And you won't be able to do that if you don't feel safe.
Yeah, and the therapist, I think, can really help with this when they sort of just help you identify how you feel. That can be as grounding as well as building resources.
Right. Bless you. You're still muted.
I've been muting my mic because I've got a cough lately.
Do you want me to read them?
Yes, please. Yes,
Let me
please.
pull it up. I got it. All right. So you read grounding and centering. So the third is building resources. Yeah, so I kind of feel like these three are like more like one with three parts.
Yeah, yeah.
All of that leading to
Even the fourth one.
yeah, from felt sense. So maybe building, yeah, from felt sense to tracking specific sensations. So that's from building resources as like just practicing feeling your body to really getting to know the specific sensations.
And I think just thinking about the people that I've worked with,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where people start to look in. So with
Right.
food, they, have a binge and they think back to like what they were feeling right before. And as they start looking in, a lot of things come up: fear, thinking, confusion, frustration, resentment, dizzy, nausea, tightness, blankness, hopelessness, worthlessness, shame.
Oh, a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff comes in.
Uh-huh.
I think this is just sort of being able to remain in a curious what comes up next.
Right.
Okay. Let's just stay with that. Let's name it. Let's say it's okay to be here. Let's recognize it as a normal response. Just tracking it.
Yep. That's phase 5. Tracking, activation,
Hmm.
sensations, images, thoughts, emotions. That seems like what you're speaking to. That's where it
Yeah, I
comes
think
up.
yeah, and this is where sorry.
Oh,
This
you're
is
good.
where I believe IFS um, really goes beyond mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Shines.
mindfulness is sort of be aware of them, be aware of the
Right.
thoughts and images and sensations, generally speaking. But I think in IFS, when we start to narrow in on a part,
Mm-hmm. To really
um,
explore.
yeah, like for example, like a part, the fear might have a voice, the fear might have a memory, the fear might have a certain role. So we should also acknowledge that his 12-step model, while it parallels IFS in many ways, it doesn't specifically mention um, kind of getting to know the parts roles.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a conversation another time, the differences between IFS and healing trauma. But I think we can just keep on going.
Yeah. Yeah. So probably a long conversation with subtle differences. So phase 6, pendulation, tracking your rhythms of expansion and contraction. And this is something he goes into, the pendulation being moving into and bite-sizing the trauma memory, the trauma experience in the present in your body so that it doesn't overwhelm you and you go into it and then you come back out and you go into like a resourced space. Do you have more on that?
Yeah, I think that's when we start to we figure out the anxiety, let's say. We feel it, we understand why it's there. It's here to protect against worthlessness. Can it, if it feels safe to let us see that worthlessness? So we touch into trauma, the story of it, and that usually overwhelms people right there. But
Mm-hmm.
then, okay, let's go back. Let's feel your feet on the ground. Let's make
Right.
sure the worthless part of you is sort of, and this is where the therapist is so helpful. I'll say, hey, use my voice. Use my voice right now. Hey, worthlessness part. We're right here. It's all good. X, the name of the person, Bob or whatever. Bob, feel your feet on the ground. feel the worthless part. Have the worthless part feel your feet on the ground right now.
Mm,
Kind of
totally.
that pendulation.
Yeah, and then like go back into the memory of where the worthlessness originated, and then come back, feel the feet on the ground, and
Yeah, usually they'll just start to add something too, like, oh yeah,
right,
like, yeah.
automatically.
Hmm.
So then phase 7, and so 7 through 9 through 10, sorry, the rest of them are going into the different types of trauma and how to unlock the energy. So phase 7, fight response, natural aggression versus violence. Phase 8, flight response, natural escape versus anxiety. Phase 9, strength and resilience versus collapse and defeat. Phase 10, uncoupling fear from the immobility response. Phase 11, orientation, moving from the internal to external environment and social engagement. Phase 12, settling and integrating. So I realize as I read through these that I think he does suggest moving in that order, accessing those energies, because the fight response helps awaken the energy, which can turn into the escape response. But I'm sure it's more nuanced depending on what is at play and what the natural response is needed.
Yeah, this is where learning about trauma becomes so useful, because
Yeah.
when we feel our anger, I remember as a kid, I got so mad one day. I punched some girls as a first grade. They scratched me, I punched them. And I was very, very ashamed, very, very ashamed. So I went overboard with violence. And probably there were other instances as well. Um, but basically, I learned that me as a kid, I learned any sort of anger is bad. You know, any sort of aggression is bad. Later on through therapy, I got in touch with, there was some violations in my relationships. People were sort of taking advantage of me. And it took me a while to realize I was feeling angry. Like, my God, was I feeling, but because I
Mm.
never really connected with that part of me, I continued letting people just trample over me. And getting in touch with anger in a healthy, mature way is so important, because we got these parts that feel that any sort of anger is not allowed. Um, so, anyways, just want to comment on that. And same with anxiety, right? I think it's normal to be afraid and excited.
Mm-hmm.
And if we aren't allowed to sort of to sort through that as a kid, we just sort of lump them all together. Any sort of activation is a danger threat, basically. And
Right.
same with the other one.
Yeah, that reminds me of just this key piece of when you're a kid and you have to simplify, you have a simplified understanding of the world. And so when you realize felt all this shame and you just made this generalized anger is bad belief, and it cut you off from the nuances of appropriate anger response. And that's pretty much all the adaptive strategies or young protective parts. That's their setup, is a overgeneralized kind of simplified understanding that they had at the time, and they just had to take it because they needed to change their behavior. Yeah. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's a great list and a
Yeah.
great book.
Yeah. Great book, Healing Trauma. Um, we'll put some links in the blog post for his book, and I think he's got a course if you want to check that out. Um,
The book has
and
lots of
the book is
exercises for
so good.
you.
The book is
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about 6 hours. It's got a lot of these exercises where he really takes his time kind of doing these imaginations where it's little things like imagine you're a gazelle and then you see a tiger. So notice the fear. And then
Hmm.
the other gazelle, then, you run and you are getting farther and farther away from the tiger. And the tiger's gone. You feel safe and you can relax. And he's got all these exercises where he kind of guides you in a little bit, guides you out, um, helps you understand how trauma's the coiled spring. I really thought that analogy was good. It's like a
Hmm.
coiled spring that never got to release. Okay, so we can start wrapping up at that.
Yeah, I just want to say I really enjoyed this,
Yeah, this is fun.
and
Yeah, this is fun.
yeah, I hope some form of it
Yeah,
continues.
yeah, this is fun. Okay, well, readers, listeners, let us know your thoughts. Um, and if you have any questions, you know what to do. Comment, etc. Reply. Yeah. Well, cool, my man.